Ruth Haley Barton's Sacred Rhythms, Arranging Our Lives for Spiritual Transformation, is a deeply reflective and practical guide to cultivating spiritual practices that nurture intimacy with God and foster inner transformation. Barton, a respected spiritual director and author, draws from her own journey of faith and from the Christian contemplative tradition to show how intentional rhythms of prayer, solitude, scripture, and self-examination can reshape the soul. Her central thesis is that spiritual transformation does not happen by accident. It requires arranging our lives around practices that open us to God's presence and grace. The book begins with Barton's recognition of the restlessness and busyness that characterize modern life. She observes that many Christians long for deeper connection with God, but struggle to find time, space, and practices that sustain intimacy. Barton insists that transformation requires intentionality. We must arrange our lives so that spiritual practices become rhythms woven into daily existence rather than occasional activities. A major theme is desire for God. Barton emphasizes that transformation begins with acknowledging our deepest longings, the hunger for God, for peace, for meaning. She encourages readers to listen to their souls and to recognize that spiritual practices are not duties, but responses to desire. Desire fuels discipline, making practices life-giving rather than burdensome. Another theme is solitude and silence. Barton highlights the importance of withdrawing from noise and distraction to encounter God in stillness. Solitude is not escape, but presence. Silence allows us to hear God's voice and to confront our own inner realities. Barton shares her own struggles with silence, acknowledging its discomfort but affirming its transformative power. The book also explores scripture meditation. Barton distinguishes between informational reading and transformational reading. She encourages readers to practice lectio divina, slow, prayerful reading that allows scripture to penetrate the heart. This contemplative approach fosters intimacy with God and reshapes desires and actions. Another key practice is self-examination. Barton emphasizes the importance of reflecting on our lives in light of God's presence. Through practices like the examen, individuals discern patterns of sin, grace, and calling. Self-examination fosters honesty, humility, and openness to change. The book also addresses prayer. Barton reframes prayer as not only petition, but communion. She encourages practices of breath prayer, contemplative prayer, and intercession, emphasizing that prayer is about relationship rather than performance. Prayer aligns the heart with God's will and nurtures intimacy. Another theme is the body and spirituality. Barton insists that transformation involves the whole person, including the body. She encourages practices of rest, Sabbath, and care for physical health as integral to spiritual life. The body is not separate from the soul, but part of the rhythm of transformation. Stylistically, Barton writes with warmth, honesty, and pastoral sensitivity. Her tone is invitational rather than prescriptive, acknowledging struggles while offering hope. She blends personal stories with biblical reflection and practical exercises, making the book accessible and relatable. Importantly, Barton reframes spiritual practices as rhythms rather than rules. They are not rigid obligations, but patterns that create space for God's work. Transformation is God's gift, but rhythms prepare the soil for grace to flourish. Ultimately, Sacred Rhythms is both a guide and a companion. It teaches that spiritual transformation requires intentional rhythms, that desire fuels discipline, and that practices of solitude, scripture, prayer, and self-examination open us to God's presence. Barton's message is clear. Arrange your life around sacred rhythms, and you will experience deeper intimacy with God and authentic transformation.